Austin, Texas. The night air is heavy, the kind that sticks to your skin and makes the cicadas sound louder. Lamps burn low behind thin curtains. A back gate clicks once and settles. In a small room off a kitchen, a servant folds a dress and sets it on a chair. In a larger room down the hall, a family whispers about bills and tomorrow's errands. And then their lamp goes out too. Somewhere past midnight, a hand feels along a fence rail, finds a loose board, and learns the shape of a latch. Morning will say a stranger came. Right now the house only knows that a latch moved, so I'll start with who lived here, and where this began. This is Austin in 1884 and 1885. Board sidewalks, rutted streets, oil lamps, wells that taste a little like iron, and neighborhoods where families depend on domestic workers for long days and short sleep. Many servants sleep in small rooms near kitchens or in separate quarters out back, close to the yard and the gate, because the day starts before sunup and ends after dishes cool. The homes are small, the fences are lower than privacy, and locks feel optional because the city still thinks neighbors are a kind of lock. People know first names, not last names. Problems are fixed with hands, not hired men, and when the moon is thin and the air won't move, sound travels farther than caution. And that's the first thing the city learns to fear: how far sound travels, and how often it travels too late. At first the nights look like separate misfortunes. One woman hurt in a back room, another dragged toward a yard. A man struck when he stumbled into the wrong doorway trying to help. Names start to gather. Women who labored long and slept light. Molly and Eliza and Irene and Mary. And then couples like Gracie and Orange, whose names sit together because they lived together. Each address has its own fence, its own dog, its own squeaky hinge. Each morning has the same questions. Which way did he come in? Why this house? Why leave money on a table and take a life outside into the yard? At first everything looks like different storms, but the clouds roll in from the same direction. The hour is late, the entry is quiet. The weapon is whatever the house already owns. An iron bar forgotten near a woodpile, a knife left to dry on a shelf, a hatchet used for kindling. Drawers stay shut, coins stay put. Doors answer more questions than people do. The yards tell you what the rooms tried to hide. Drag marks in dust, bent grass, a place where someone stopped and balanced their weight to lift a body over a low fence. Early on, the police write burglary because that's what goes in a blank space when something bad happens after dark. Before long, they scratch that word out and switch to assault, then murder, and then something the city doesn't have a neat name for yet. So we follow the clock from one midnight to another, because the clock knows more than any headline. You can hear the city breathe. A bar 2 blocks away lets its last song fade. A mule brays once, complaining to no one. The kitchen's yesterday heat still hangs in the doorway. The servant's room is where a day's work collapses into sleep, not where a war should start. Yet a war walks in, quiet, practiced, unhurried enough to mean someone has done this before. The hinge that squeaks at noon is silent at 1 in the morning. The dog that barks at passers-by in daylight sleeps through the sound of a screen lifted just enough to let a hand through. A hand that knows where to reach after it slides past wire and wood. But investigators soon discover something that doesn't make sense. The house looks searched for a person, not for things. Money is a habit. Jewelry is a habit. People are plans. In home after home, the plan is the same. Move fast. Go to the room where the light is lowest. Take the person who would raise the alarm, and keep the yard as a second room with no walls to echo sound. The assaults are sudden and close. I won't describe what the wounds look like because that's not the kind of detail that helps a mind. What does help is the way the house answers questions. There's a scuff on a sill where a shoe pivoted. There's a dent in dirt where a knee sat down. There's a bit of cotton on a nail that didn't bother anyone for 10 years and suddenly decided to become a clue. So we move with the officers who arrive before dawn, and we learn the habit of kneeling. They kneel to see drag marks in powder-dry dust. They kneel to press 2 fingers against a footprint, to measure how long the heel is and how narrow the toe. Some prints look bare, some look like thin-soled shoes. Rain will ruin the best of these, so a constable looks up at a blank sky and swallows hard. A doctor's lantern trembles a little as he crouches. When he stands, it steadies. On a porch rail, a smear that's more suggestion than mark. On a fence post, a nick that could be 10 different things. Each small piece points away from coins and toward control. At first, everything looked like burglary, until one detail changed the case forever. The detail is choice. He chooses people over property, night over noise, yards over rooms. The police learned to separate stories from shadows. A neighbor thought she heard a laugh, but might have heard the piano on Congress Avenue carried sideways by wind. A boy saw a hat in an alley but couldn't tell whether it was on a head or hanging from a nail. The city starts to sit up late. Men offer to watch outside doors with shotguns across their knees. Some do. Some fall asleep. Fear makes promises that wakefulness cannot keep. So the city tries to turn fear into rules. Pair up at night. Tighten latches. Keep a lantern trimmed. Whistle if anything moves where it shouldn't. And for a week the rules look like they work. Then a Saturday night finds a weakness nobody counted on. We are social creatures. Saturday is for music. For a drink that turns into two. For a story on a porch that runs longer than intended. Patrol routes thin when two officers are called across town for a fight that turns out to be shouting and pride. A separate yard with a separate gate becomes the way in. The house doesn't change. The decision does. I leaned closer and saw the first clear clue. It isn't a knife or a hatchet. It's the calendar. Late Saturday into early Sunday keeps showing up like an echo that won't die. Some victims are attacked on other nights, but the pattern tightens around weekends like a knot in a cord. That suggests a person with a weekday rhythm. A job maybe, a route maybe, a reason to be awake when other men sleep. And the map tightens too. Addresses near alleys, near creeks, near places where a person can step from yard to shadows in 4 strides and disappear like a breath held too long. Then someone says, "Match the nights, not the names," and the map starts to talk. Dots cluster around the parts of town where servants' quarters sit closest to fences, where boards have gaps a hand can learn, where a yard is large enough to be a room and small enough to be a trap. Officers adjust routes. Citizens form watch groups. For a time that helps. Not because patrols see more, but because patrols move differently. When you expect to see nothing, you walk straight. When you expect to see something, you circle. Circling helps. For a little while, but investigators soon discover something that doesn't make sense. The killer adapts as easily as the city does. If the back door is strong, a window screen becomes the answer. If dogs bark early in the week, they bark late on Saturday, as if someone learned which yard has which temperament. If men sit on porches with rifles, a house where men work a late shift becomes the house in trouble. The method is simple. Entry that doesn't break wood loudly. A quick move to the sleeping place. A weapon taken from within reach. And a retreat path that leaves nothing behind except the tool he doesn't need to carry. So the city tries to make houses smaller by choice. People sleep in the same rooms. Drag pallets together. Lock doors that never used to lock. Doors that never used to lock. Some families bring axes into bedrooms, which feels like wisdom at dusk and feels like a question when a hinge lifts at 2 a.m. A husband tries to keep watch, nods off, wakes to a noise that might have been a stray cat, and hates himself for the rest of a life that hasn't happened yet. A mother teaches a child not to cry at night because she's afraid the noise will carry. The child swallows tears like medicine and learns a lesson nobody should learn. By the time the police arrive each morning now, the real work is just starting. Separating rumor from pattern without the benefit of science that won't exist for decades. No fingerprint files. No organized crime labs. Lantern light and common sense, and the slow courage of walking the same route again tonight, even though last night was enough. They collect tools left near scenes, irons, bars, hatchets, and list them by weight and shape. They test a theory. If the footprint length is such and such, then the man might be this tall. But dirt lies. Mud stretches. Bare feet tell less than boots, and bare feet show up more often than boots. Why bare? Because shoes make sound. Then the pattern shifts in a way nobody wanted. from black servant women toward white women in separate homes on a single winter night. Christmas Eve turns into Christmas Day, and two homes on different streets wake to scenes that shatter any belief that terror knows boundaries. Susan in one home, Eula in another, attacked with a violence that feels like both a repetition and an escalation. The city, already afraid, panics in a way that changes what officials can hear. The press explodes. The courthouse fills. The need for a face and a name becomes louder than the need for a method. The police thought they had the right suspect, but a shocking twist was waiting. A husband is charged, convicted, and then freed on appeal. His case shows you what happens when grief, pressure, and pattern collide. A jury is asked to carry more than evidence can hold. For months, the town argues in kitchens and on porches. Some say the husband, some say a stranger, some say both. Meanwhile, the map quietly shows the same language. Late hour, quiet entry, on-site weapon, the yard used as a stage where no one claps. And then, just when the city thinks it has learned to predict fear, the nights go quiet. No clean ending. No confession. No body found on the road with a note in a pocket. The attacks slow, then stop. People say the killer left, hitched to a freight train, carried to another town where people do not yet shut their windows tight. People say the killer died, or was jailed for another crime, or married and handed fear off to a different kind of house. People say copycats borrowed the method and then got bored or scared. What we have are fewer dots on the map and more questions than we started with. So we stand in the quiet with the same 4 boxes of proof we always had. Timing, entry, weapons, movement. Timing. After midnight, often late Saturday into early Sunday. Entry. Simple and quiet. Screens lifted, latches eased. Fence rails learned by touch. Weapons. What the house already owned. Tools of work turned into tools of harm. Movement. A person taken from a room to a yard, where the sky is a ceiling that doesn't carry sound back to neighbors in the same way walls do. Everything else is a story we tell when the facts run out. 2 facts can't both be true, unless there's a third thing we missed. Here are the 2 facts. It looks like one hand, and yet the descriptions don't match. Some witnesses say tall, some short. Some say a dark coat, some a light shirt. Some say bare feet, some thin soles. The third thing might be this. The method is the constant, not the body. Either one person changed hats and habits enough to blur himself, or more than one person wore the method like a coat because the method worked. The city still doesn't know which answer hurts less. So we listen to the houses, because houses don't lie. A back door that never mattered suddenly matters more than the parlor. A window screen that once just kept summer out becomes the reason a family sleeps or doesn't. A yard becomes a room that needs a lock it doesn't have. People add bars to doors, move beds, teach children to whistle low instead of scream high, because low carries differently on a warm night. The whole city becomes a workshop for small changes that feel like hope, and in those changes, you can read what the fear taught. The killer learned the yards. The city learned the yards too. And in learning the yards, the city starts to invent a language it will need later in other towns with other names for fear. Patrol patterns, footfall timing, the idea of a perimeter around a home instead of just walls. The understanding that a tool left near a door is both useful and dangerous. You can feel the future quietly starting to write itself in the present. More locks, better screens, neighbors who don't mind being asked for one more look before they go to bed. It's not triumph, it's survival. So when the case goes quiet, what remains isn't satisfaction. What remains is the habit of looking twice. People keep asking, why untouched money? Perhaps robbery was never the reason. Why outdoors? Perhaps sound was the enemy and stars were allies. Why Saturday? Perhaps the killer had a weekday life that needed Saturday to disguise the hours or thin the patrols. Why servants first? Perhaps proximity and access shaped the choice. Small rooms near doors, predictable routines, yards that belong to work rather than guests. None of these answers forgive anything. They only arrange the questions in a row that a careful person can walk along without tripping. And that row leads us to the last doorway we can open. The status of the case and the story we carry now. Status: unsolved. The city proved a method and failed to prove a face. It proved the time, the entries, the tools, the movement, and the way valuables stayed put while lives did not. It failed to produce a courtroom-strong chain that would tie one human being to every night. The law needs names and times and things that can be held up and not argued with. This case has times and places and things that point, but they point like weather vanes, true to the wind, but never to the hand that made the wind blow. So the pages close, not because the story is finished, but because the ink ran out. And yet the diary keeps one more habit. Before it sleeps, it asks a question out loud, because questions invite answers even 140 years late. Which detail speaks loudest to you? The raised latch with no splintered wood, the money that sat through the night untouched, the simple tools waiting where anybody could reach them, or the way footprints turn to nothing the second dirt gives way to stone. If you had 5 minutes with one witness, would you choose the neighbor who heard nothing and ask how nothing sounds, or the survivor who saw only a shape and asked an alley and had to stop as if the ground itself decided to stop helping? Viewers, stay with me, because what happens next will surprise you. You will start checking your own doors differently tonight, even though your century has stronger locks than theirs did. You'll look at your yard and see a room. You'll look at your neighbor's light and feel how comfort moves sideways from house to house. And you'll understand why this story, which belongs to Austin in 1884 and 1885, also belongs to any place where people fall asleep trusting wood and habit more than the idea that someone could make a habit out of wood. And that understanding brings us back to the first line we wrote tonight. A latch moved. Out there, somewhere, in that string of hot nights, a hand learned which latches move and which ones don't, which boards complain and which keep secrets. Inside here, tonight, a voice learned which questions help and which ones only make the room darker. We can't name him. We can name the people who deserved better than a line on a map. We can say their names alongside their work, how early they rose, how deep they slept in the hour they were allowed to keep, how little their rooms were, and how large their lives felt to the families who leaned on them. So I'll leave the lamps low and the window cracked for air, and I'll leave the page open. If you want a second part, I can walk the city block by block with a map, time the routes an intruder could use, test how long it takes to lift a screen quietly, and set Saturday nights against weekdays to see what the minutes do. For now, the minutes have taken us from one midnight to the next, through yards and rooms and porches and courtrooms that said not enough. The story doesn't end with a name. It ends with a neighborhood that refused to sleep the same way again. I'll keep the page open until the truth walks in. And while we wait, I'll walk one more night the way a watchman would, minute by minute, because sometimes the clock tells more truth than any name can. 11:47 p.m., a lantern, 2 streets over, goes out. You can hear that, in a way. Silence steps closer when a light dies. A man finishing a letter at a kitchen table folds it twice and leaves it for the morning's post. The chair scrapes. He yawns. A servant in a back room turns her pillow once to the cool side and lets her breath lengthen. The back gate makes a soft sound like a sentence changing its mind. 56 p.m. A watchman checks his pocket watch and thinks it runs fast tonight, which is only to say the street feels thinner. His boots do not hurry. He counts. 4 porches on the left with steps too steep to jump. 3 on the right with vines that could hide a man if a man was already there. He knows the yards by smell as much as sight. Soap water, wood smoke, bacon grease turned sweet in a pail someone forgot to empty. At 3 a.m. A hand tests a screen not with force but with questions. Where does it lift? Where does it bite? The wire says no, and then yes, the way a tired person answers a favor. The hand pauses. Pauses matter. The watchman, 2 houses away, also pauses. He thinks of a rumor about bare feet and tells himself bare feet are only one man's story, and maybe the man had his boots off for a different reason. He moves again because his job is to move. 7 a.m. Inside the servants' room, a floorboard will complain if a heel lands hard. It does not complain. The step is a toe, then a knee, then a shape that belongs to the room even when it doesn't. This is the part I won't dress up. Harm happens quickly, like a sentence with no comma. A name loses its future. The house does what houses do. It holds, it keeps, it fails to shout. 11 a.m. The yard answers instead. Something heavy is moved where grass remembers. Gravel remembers too for a few minutes, then returns to being gravel. A fence rail gives a small cough. A cat, useless as cats are to human trouble, springs away and forgets what it saw by morning. 16 a.m. The watchman feels his pocket watch again, though he knows the time now by breath. He hears nothing he can use. He smells damp wood and oil. He passes a yard that is not his to check, because no one has given him the right to step into the private corners of this city unless a shout invites him. No shout comes. A lullaby ends in a house he will never enter. 12:22 a.m. The intruder cleans in a sink with the same grace a cook uses in morning light, fast and practiced. Water runs. The splash is smaller than the city thinks it would be. There is no towel. There is a skirt, a rag, a nothing, and then wet hands are air again. The tool, bar, blade, wood, stays where it lived yesterday. That is the signature, not what he brings, but what he uses because it was already there. 2:27 a.m. A neighbor opens a window to cool the room and pulls it down again because the air is heavy and the world feels like it's looking back. She goes back to bed with one ear turned to the yard. She will swear later in daylight that she heard a sound, but she will not remember when, and the hour will be a fish slipping out of the net. 12:31 a.m. The watchman turns at the end of the block and gives the street back to itself. He hums something because humming keeps fear warm without feeding it. He notes a loose board in a step he'll ask a carpenter to fix. He does not note a man because there is not one to note. What there is the absence of sound right where sound should be if the world were fair. 12:40 a.m. The intruder is gone. He leaves a map of where he was that lasts exactly until a broom erases it, or rain corrects it, or the newsmen with fresh ink and hungry faces step into the yard and stamp the ground into mud. Dawn. A rooster decides he invented morning. Someone screams because dawn is the hour when houses begin to speak. The watchman runs because the human sound he needed finally arrived, late as it always is. By the time he reaches the gate, the yard has already told its worst. He writes what he can, and he hates each line. That one night looks like 100, and yet we can't prove it is the same man. So we watch another perspective, not a watchman now, but a young reporter, because papers shaped how the city thought, and thought shapes patrols even when patrols pretend it doesn't. The reporter is 22 and too proud of his hat. He calls on the police chief by day, and the lamplighters by dusk, and the widowers by accident. He has learned to bring bread, not questions, to doors that just learned how heavy wood can be. He scribbles words that sell fiend, demon, stalker, because fear buys copies. At first he helps. He prints notices to pair up, to oil hinges, to move axes indoors. Then he learns that each word he chooses bends a patrolman's next hour. If he writes fiend, people expect one man and stop looking sideways at neighbors. If he writes copycat, people expect many and see a suspect at every lamp post. If he writes servant, the city hears class, and the truth gets lost under that heavy word. At first, everything looked like the right headline would save us, until one detail changed the case forever. The detail is that fear doesn't read carefully. It reads fast, the way night walks. So the reporter slows down. He gathers statements as if they are diary entries, not quotes. He writes times, not adjectives. He adds a small box to his piece. How long to lift a screen quietly? He times a carpenter. 40 seconds if the frame is tired. 2.5 minutes if it is proud and new. The box changes more porch talk than his column does. People time their own screens. They learn their own houses. Now we switch to a woman's letter, because the city had many letters and few were printed. Her handwriting is strong but tired. She writes to a sister in San Antonio. We are well but not sleeping. The locks squeal like children being told no. I have moved my bed and nailed the back steps where a loose board gave too easily. Mrs. H. kept her husband up 3 nights in a row with the rifle, and on the 4th night fell asleep mid-prayer. She woke with the rifle on the floor and wept for being human. I do not know whether to be brave or to be still. Tell me whether courage means staying where I am or leaving for a time. Tell me whether to shame myself by fear or to shame myself by going. Letters turned into choices, and choices turned into maps of who stayed and who left. The city changed shape as families sent children to kin out of town, as servants took rooms together closer to the streetlight, as men who talked big at noon fell quieter at dusk. Bar owners kept music running later for company, and for a week that felt smart. Then quiet nights returned the way quiet does when it is owed. But investigators soon discovered something that didn't make sense. They posted rewards and got stories that matched the reward, not the facts. A man with a scar, a man with a limp, a man with an accent that traveled from one storyteller to the next, like a borrowed coat. The best story, they learned the hard way, is the one that doesn't change under a second telling. Most did. So the chief tried a thing both simple and hard. He put the same 2 officers on the same 2 streets for 2 weeks with orders to listen, not look. Looking had failed. Listening might notice pattern. They learned the sound of late laundry, the sound of mules at rest, the sound of rain hitting cane, the sound of feet that belong and the sound of feet that do not. They learned the sound of the wind under a raised screen, which is different from the wind under a screen that sleeps. They learned it too late for that week's house, but not too late for the idea. Sound is a map. The officers made a list of useless noises so they could throw those sounds out. A drunk man singing the same verse twice is useless until the 3rd verse stops abruptly. That's not useless. A dog barking at a cat is useless unless the bark stops mid-bark. That means someone made it stop. A far hammer from the railroad is useless unless it becomes near. Then it is a man. With this small science, they interrupted one break-in. Not the Annihilators, maybe, but a man with bad ideas. The city found out that saving one house is not solving a case. And still, one house felt like a victory. We stand now where Christmas Eve turned into Christmas Day, because that night sits like a stone at the bottom of a river and changes the flow around it. You already know the names. You do not need the details. What matters here is how the city's brain split. People who wanted patterns said, "It is the same hand, a rising curve, a new cruelty." People who wanted someone said, "It is this man," because grief needs a person to point at more than it needs a clock to study. The courtroom tried to be both a clock and a finger. It failed at both for a while, then failed at one forever. An appeal did what appeals do. It reminded us that law loves certainty more than fear does. Fear lost a man. Law kept its rules. The city kept its doubt. The police thought they had the right suspect. But a shocking twist was waiting. The twist is that no twist came. No deathbed confession. No found trunk with trophies. No traveling worker who boasted in a bar and then proved it when sober. The years after 1885 brought rumors that road trains faster than facts. A story from another city with blood on it would stop in Austin like a train making water, and men on the platform would say, "Ours went there." Maybe. But maybe is an honest word only when we mark it as maybe and do not spend it like truth. So where does that leave us, besides tired? It leaves us with the human map the case forced the city to draw. Look at what changed. Screens were nailed firmer, latches gained friends, axes came inside, watch routes curved. Men learned to listen. Women's letters wrote the truth before newspapers did. Children learned to whistle low, a small, sharp sound that travels sideways and brings adults without turning the house into a parade. It leaves us with the knowledge that yards are rooms, that doors are agreements, that silence is a message whether we like it or not. 2 facts can't both be true, unless there's a third thing we missed. Fact A. The case looks like one mind moving through many houses. Fact B. The descriptions won't sit still. And the skill appears in more than one place at the same time when rumors run fast. Third thing, the method may be the true culprit, learned by one, then copied by another, or tested on the city by one, then retired, or carried away by a man whose name never mattered to anyone but the people who loved the ones he took. If you need a shape to hate, hate the method. Quiet entry, on-site weapon, yard for a room, money left like a joke. By hating the method, we learn to close the door that method loves. Now I want to bring you back into one last house, not because anything famous happened there, but because nothing did, and that is the lesson you can carry. A mother read the paper and did not sleep for 3 nights. On the 4th, she moved the trunk that used to sit under the back window to in front of it, and hammered 2 nails into the sash with her palm as a hammer, because the real hammer was with her husband at his job. She dragged the wood box to the door and wedged it under the latch. She put the axe inside because she read that sentence and believed it. She taught her boy to whistle once for come, twice for danger, and 3 short when it was nothing after all. Nothing happened at that house, and nothing is the goal. The city will say in later years that the monster was a man, and the man was a monster, and both are true in ways that do not help at night. What helps at night is a second latch, a trimmed wick, a neighbor who knows your whistle, and a patrol that understands sound. Austen learned those things too early and then taught them to other towns by being a story whispered on trains. Status, final, unsolved. The boxes remain where we left them. Timing after midnight, often Saturday into Sunday. Entry quiet and patient. Weapons ordinary and borrowed. Movement from room to yard. Valuables untaken. Suspects many, proof thin. The calendar ended the attacks. The court did not end the doubt. The names we can say belong to the victims. The name we cannot say belongs to a method whose face we never saw. Which leaves us here, back at the desk with the lamp turned low. The page still open. And one last thing the diary knows how to do, hand you the next line. Now you, which detail still sits loudest? The screen that lifted, the latch that yielded, the untouched coins, the wet sink, or the way sound arrived always a beat too late. If you could ask one person one question, would it be the watchman? What did you hear that you didn't write? Ah, the reporter. Which word do you regret? Ah, the mother. What finally let you sleep? And or the survivor? What did movement tell you that a face could not? At first, everything looked like separate storms, and then a city learned to track the wind. But investigators soon discovered something that didn't make sense. And maybe that is the answer. Not every truth gives us a name. Some truths only give us better doors. I'll keep the page open until the truth walks in. And if it never does, I'll keep the lamp trimmed, the window hooked, the axe inside, and the whistle between my teeth, ready to teach the next house what Austen had to learn the hard way.